West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
This weekend, the judge rejected your request for 3 more days to consider the special counsel's proposed rules for how to handle evidence. The proposed protective order that would let Trump use some sensitive information but not take that information with him. Will you agree to that?
Well, first of all, this protective order that's being suggested by the Biden administration is an effort to keep from the press important non-sensitive information that the Biden administration has that may speak to
This isn't by the Biden administration. This is by the
President
special
Trump.
independent counsel.
No, here for this reason, no. The independent counsel, it's not independent, it's special counsel, has to get the approval of Merrick Garland in order to go forward. Joe Biden said in November 2022 that he wanted to see President Trump prosecuted and taken out of this race.
There's
so it
no,
is the Biden
I'm just going to stop you because there's no evidence
but the
that
bottom line is,
Joe Biden is involved in this. And you're right, it's a special counsel. Let's just stick to the question. Do you believe that this is something that you'll agree to?
The point is that we will not agree to keeping information that's not sensitive from the press. The press and the American people in a campaign season have a right to know what the evidence is in this case, provided that this evidence is not protected otherwise. So we're going to oppose it, as we have. But for whatever reason, these lawyers on the prosecution team want to keep that from the press.
Well, won't the evidence come out in trial anyway?
That the press, some of it will, not all of it. I'm shocked that the press isn't lined up objecting to this protective order, because not only is President Trump being attacked for his First Amendment rights, now these prosecutors are trying to impinge on the freedom of the press.
Okay, let's stick to, I appreciate you trying to stick up for us.
What's happening. I'm telling you.
I appreciate you trying to stick up for us, but let's talk about the actual
I'm telling you what's going on right now.
Substance of what they were trying to do in the filing, which was try to make the point not only that they want to keep the discovery information, what the witnesses said, for the time being quiet, but also he made pretty clear, the special counsel, that the idea that the former president is calling him deranged and mentally ill is something that maybe shouldn't be happening. So let me ask you, as his attorney in this criminal case, do you want your client to stop speaking publicly like this? Using terms like that.
This case was brought by the Biden administration in the middle of a political campaign, and with the realization that people are out there campaigning for office. I'm not involved in the campaign. I'm involved in representing.
Totally understand.
Mr.
You're
Trump
not his campaign manager. You are his lawyer. As his lawyer, would you want a client to say things like this about the special counsel?
One thing that we are going to do is fight this very, very unusual, outside of the bounds criminal prosecution of First Amendment rights vigorously in court. My focus is on addressing the issues. One of the issues that the Biden administration will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that Donald Trump had corrupt intent, had criminal intent when he protested the results of the 2020 election. That's core freedom of speech. That's
okay,
core
let's talk about
speech,
this. You've talked
which
about
is
freedom of
protected
speech.
under our Constitution.
You've talked about freedom of speech a lot. I want you to listen to what Donald Trump's own former Attorney General said about that argument.
I really don't think that's a valid argument. He can say whatever he wants. He can even lie. He can even tell people that the election was stolen when he knew better. Free speech doesn't give you the right to engage in a fraudulent conspiracy.
Your response?
Well, first of all, there was no fraudulent conspiracy. That's part of the reality of the defense. What President Trump was entitled to do, and what Mr. Barr misses, and I'm not sure he's read all the cases, but when it comes to political speech, you can not only advocate for a position, but you can take action, you can petition, you can ask even your vice president to pause the vote for a period of time in order to allow the states to recertify.
But you can't break the law, which is what this indictment alleges.
What was it?
It alleges that he caused actions like approving fake.
What was it?
I'll tell you what the
indictment
says. The indictment says that he attempted to cause actions like approving fake electors, opening sham fraud investigations, and obstructing the certification of the election. Whether he can prove that, that's going to happen in the trial. I'm just saying what's in the indictment.
Yeah, but right, and let me take the first thing, the question about electors, okay? Alternate electors are used in every 4-year cycles, okay? The Senate parliamentarian acknowledged to Vice President Pence that they always receive protest alternate electors. None of those electors were counted. Vice President Pence was completely aware of the nature of the
They weren't
the
counted because Mike Pence rejected this scheme. That's why they weren't counted.
Absolutely, and that's how the Of course, and that's how the political process works. But there was no defrauding, there was no trickery, there was no deceit.
Because if Mike Pence had said yes, then that's exactly what would have happened.
No, because...
And that's only one.
Because thankfully, with freedom of the press, you have to let me finish, though, because, no, but you asked me a question, and I hope you can let me finish, because the government alleges deceit or trickery, and all of this played out in the open. It's all free speech. There was a Supreme Court decision, Hammerschmidt, which is right on point, that says when you're exercising free speech, you're not engaging in a fraud on the government. And that's what, unfortunately, most people don't understand.
That's just one example of the actions. That's just one example of the actions in this indictment.
But you're entitled.
And this is a long list that we've compiled from the indictment. I mean, it's more than a dozen, not speech, actions that the former president allegedly took.
Like what?
I mean, where do I even start?
What? Tell me.
Asking the Arizona speaker to interfere with ascertaining Arizona's electors. The Justice Department to conduct...
Asking is speech.
But any alleged
asking is speech.
But almost all alleged criminal activity has to do with using words and is speech. And that's listen.
What you don't
this is obviously the defense that you're going to use, and it will be fascinating to see how it works out in a court of law. I want to move on to another issue.
I got to tell you though. But you make an interesting point, because you're saying that asking is action. No, asking is aspirational. Asking is not action. It's core free speech. The press should be defending free speech in this case.
Let's talk about something else that you've repeatedly said, and that is that the former president ultimately asked his vice president only for a pause in the electoral count. But it followed.
That was one of the things. Ultimately, the final ask. The final ask in the ellipse speech was that, which President Trump was following the advice of his lawyer.
The word ultimately, I've heard you use many times. The word ultimately is doing a lot of work in that sentence. I know you're intentionally using the word ultimately because at that point,
ultimately because it's the truth.
I know. You're right. It is the truth, because at that point he was asking for a pause. But it's
And I'm
only
entitled
because
to advocate on behalf of a
it's
client.
only because for many, many, many other asks before that, what the former president was asking Mike Pence to do was to completely stop it and reject it. And that is the point that Mike Pence is making. It's that it got to the point where he said pause because Mike Pence says, I'm not going to reject it. Sure.
Okay. So what we have, and many people don't understand this, is a memo from John Eastman, an esteemed constitutional scholar, laying out a number of scenarios. Those scenarios were presented to Vice President Pence. He considered them, and as a constitutional matter, he rejected them. One of the last and the ultimate requests that President Trump made was to pause the voting for 10 days to allow the states to recertify or certify or audit, and Mr. Pence rejected that as well. After that, there was a peaceful transition of power. So that's how the constitutional works.
Okay. What happened on January 6th was not peaceful. I want to ask you something about John Eastman, because you've talked a lot about how he's a respected constitutional attorney.
The transfer of power was certainly peaceful.
Did you see what happened on January 6th? Did that look peaceful?
And by the way, did you? I'm not saying that was in any way inappropriate, but the ultimate power of the presidency was transferred.
I just want to quickly ask about John Eastman. John Eastman said, according to this indictment, that he actually, even when he was talking to the vice president's counsel, that he thought that his plan to reject the slate of electors would be rejected by the Supreme Court. 9-0.
He thought he was right. And by the way, that proposal was not the ultimate one presented to Vice President Pence. But what happens in the course of a constitutional discussion like this is all legal theories are discussed and analyzed. And once again, what President Trump was doing is within the reality and the realm of free speech. He's asking his vice president, what about taking this course of action? Ultimately, his vice president rejected all of the proposals that were made.
One quick question before I let you go about the trial.
But you have to let me finish. No. One quick response. What President Trump did not do is direct Vice President Pence to do anything. He asked him in an aspirational way. Asking is covered by the First Amendment.
It is Monday, the 7th of August of 2023. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, our little Yorkie, is our door girl. And she will be seating you directly for our especially special, daily special, River City Hash Mondays. Because, well, it's the weekend past. And there's a few tidbits that we need to, well, repurpose for your gourmet and intellectual delight. I don't know how intellectual it is, but tasty nonetheless. I'll continue with this as far as it'll go, and I don't know how far it'll go because it just keeps going. Okay. Can we refute everything that Trump's lawyer just spewed? My God. First of all, Joe Biden didn't bring the case. That's not how America works. I know that's how it worked with Trump, okay? But America doesn't work that way. Our judicial system does not work that way. The president doesn't lay out an edict like he's Pinochet, even if he's Pinochet. And everybody jumps to his whim, and it's always a he. Beyond that, America doesn't work that way. I am sorry. We are aspirationally different, aren't we? So it's not Joe Biden bringing this. It's not Joe Biden's defense. It's not Joe Biden's prosecution. All right? I know that Donald Trump had his cadre, and he continues to have his cadre embedded in our government. He does. So, It's not Joe. And they'll just continue to, with that meme or that claim that it's the Biden prosecution of his political rival. First of all, it's not the middle of a campaign season. Normally, the campaign season hasn't even started. But once again, there's two tiers, one for Donald Trump and one for everybody else. And the tier that old Donnie's in just is so constraining. What? Give this guy everything, it's still not enough. Okay, so, no. He is now, I guess, this lawyer, he didn't mention it in the clip, but speculation is that he is going to demand, meaning Trump, is demanding that the judge recuse herself because she's a Trump hater. Now, of course, in a mobster's mind, anybody they haven't paid off or anybody who owes them a favor, favors, are haters. They're haters of Trump by definition. If they're not able to be turned into loyalists, they are disloyal to Trump. And the only people that can judge Donald Trump are the ones that he's paid off. Now, once again, our system's not supposed to work that way. I know it kind of worked that way during Trump's time. And it continues to work that way here. I'd sure like to have that judge in Plano, Texas, recuse himself. And what about Eileen Cannon? Has Jack Smith asked her to recuse? When she's made, like, fundamental mistakes, like forgot to swear in a grand jury. Did some other, quote, procedural errors that actually could have had cases thrown out, except some senior members of the court came to her aid. Nope. You play with what is cast. They always want to move the goalposts. Always. Because they can't win on the merits. They can't win on the arguments. They can't win on the moral or spiritual aspects either. So, we got that going for us. And I guess we're going to have to put up with it until 5 o'clock Eastern time. And then maybe we'll find out. No, we won't find out that quickly. That's just when things have to be entered. So, I guess we're in the finding out stage. Trump can't stand that anybody might even come close to using the strategy that he uses, but we don't. That's the whole point. They're crooked as hell, and they just presume everybody else is more crooked because they're such good people and bestowed by grace from God. So by definition, everybody else must be evil, and that's us. Commies. We're all commies. A bunch of crap. Got this, I don't know, ascendant Bircher BS come back? What the hell? Is this purgatory? Fuck. And it seemed like it changed overnight. We went to sleep, kind of had a little dream, woke up, and then the nightmares started coming into realization that it was a nightmare. Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional to white people? What the hell? Yeah, white people are the most persecuted in the world. Wow, I wish that were true. Actually, I don't. What I wish is due process and equal protection for all, which is a great American ideal. I wish we'd get back to it. The founders were aspirational, I know, but it's up to us to put it into action, right? Right. All right. What else do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin this fabulous River City Hash Mondays. Well, a black man in Alabama filed a lawsuit against white locals who changed the locks on City Hall and shut off review of the small town's bank account after he won the mayor's race. Alabama. Yeah, they're the ones that are just ignoring a Supreme Court order, too. Send in the God. Okay, we will. 2 conservative groups have sued to block the recent Biden plan canceling $39 billion in student loans. And I guess that means that Clarence won't recuse himself after he had his RV loan forgiven. Yeah. And Oregon extended its crab fishing restrictions to protect whales from getting caught in crab pot trap ropes. Try saying that real fast. That's why I didn't. After the break, we move to the chef's table where the extremist far-right Alternative for Germany party declared the European Union a failed project. And German police are investigating the anti-Semitic motive in an attack on an Israeli tourist in Berlin. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and thank you, Kelly, for doing so. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln because I like to repeat it, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds to us once a month, thereby becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us pay down the bills. Actually, we pay the bills, but your help really does help, because the bills keep coming, they keep increasing, and there's other costs accrued that we pay out. In fact, we just paid out quite a large chunk for doing our podcasts. And so if you could help us defray some of those costs, it really does help. Because even though we do this mostly by pulling out what we can out of our own wallets, we still count on you, our listeners, because you are our greatest contributor. Thank you for being Patreons of Netroots Radio. All right, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, yeah, we're still there so far. And also on Mastodon and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those and a lot more. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, and also Blue Sky. Don't ask me why. I got an invite, so I'm trying it out. And we'll see. But nonetheless, you can find me most everywhere as Justice Putnam. So at Justice Putnam, or just simply Justice Putnam. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, because I put it in a queue and it's automatic. You set the time parameters, poof, it goes on like an alarm clock. Anyway, that comes up 10 minutes before showtime, and that's where you can find the real reportage of what we are drawing inspiration from here. Or is it aspiration? I think we're acting on our aspirations. I wonder what that means. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, it's just a placemat. I know I'm going to really make it active on these other platforms, I promise. But you can find the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And also, please, I mentioned the podcasts, if you could pick them up on Spreaker. And not on Stitcher anymore. But you can find us on TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, Deezer. Really, wherever podcasts can be found, you just can't find them on Stitcher anymore. And that's because SiriusXM. That's all I got to say about that. You know how I feel. Yes, you do. I've been reminding you since they did it. All right. Okay. Let us now look into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it's by Meredith Edwards and Rachel Clark from the CNN website. Patrick Braxton accomplished something no black man in his Alabama town had done in its 166-year history. He became mayor. He told CNN he ran for office in 2020 to serve the fewer than 300 residents of New Bern, or is that New Bern, to connect them to help if they didn't have enough food or to spread information on staying healthy in the COVID pandemic. And when there were no other declared candidates, he won by default. Well, that's how it works in America, isn't it? But within weeks of his win, and before he got to take his oath of office, Braxton says he was dethroned in a secret scheme orchestrated by the former leadership, who he says did not want to hand over power to a black mayor who was planning to appoint new council members. His opponents set in action a plan to thwart a majority black city council from taking office and to effectively prevent the first black mayor from exercising the duties and power of his new job. And that's according to the lawsuit filed by Braxton and the 4 residents he named as his counsel. The lawsuit alleges the locks on the town hall were changed so Braxton could not get in, adding he was denied access to the post office box used for official mail, and the local bank would not let him see the town accounts. Patrick Braxton accomplished something no other black resident of the city of New Bern had ever accomplished since the city's founding in 1854. He was duly elected mayor of the city, the lawsuit claims. I think it's more than a claim. However, the minority white residents of the city, long accustomed to exercising total control over city government, refused to accept this outcome, and that's because it's their heritage. Now, they always rely on their heritage. They have a great heritage of not allowing black people anything if they can help it. Now, Braxton's allegations are being disputed by the defendants, including Hayward Woody Stokes III, the man who was mayor before Braxton and whom the suit alleges became mayor again. After a special election, Braxton said he knew nothing about. Yeah. Stokes did not respond to requests for comment made by CNN in email, phone calls, and in person. His fellow defendants also did not answer messages. One of the lawyers representing them and Stokes, Rick Howard, wrote in an email, "We do not comment on pending litigation and refer you to the court filings." Well, that's rather boilerplate. In the filings, the defendants say there was no conspiracy and no racial discrimination. 166 years. Never let a black person on the council, let alone mayor. In one motion, lawyers for the defendants wrote, "There is no clearly established law regarding what to do when an Alabama town does not hold elections for decades. Based on the allegations of the complaint, the New Bern defendants certainly could have attempted to rectify the situation by doing exactly what they did. That is, holding another election. installing legitimate council members, and installing a legitimate mayor pursuant to Alabama law. Really? Does Alabama law stipulate that only white residents can sit on these councils? Only white people can be a mayor? New Bern lies in western Alabama, deep in the agricultural black belt named for the dark richness of the soil. It's about an hour's drive from Selma, where civil rights marchers were beaten in 1965 as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and 20 minutes west of Marion, where Martin Luther King Jr. married Coretta Scott, and where the shooting death of a church deacon spurred the voting rights movement. Colin Binkley of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Two conservative groups are asking a federal court to block the Biden administration's plan to cancel $39 billion in student loans for more than 800,000 borrowers. In a lawsuit filed on Friday in Michigan, the groups argue that the administration overstepped its power when it announced the forgiveness in July, just weeks after the Supreme Court struck down a broader cancellation plan pushed by President Joe Biden. It asked a judge to rule the cancellation illegal and to stop the Education Department from carrying it out while the case is decided. Of course they do. The lawsuit was filed by the New Civil Liberties Alliance. Yeah. We got to protect everybody who's, I don't know, conservative and wearing a swastika. Yeah, that's one way of putting it. And on behalf of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy and the Cato Institute. We know where they come from. The Education Department called the suit a desperate attempt from right-wing special interests to keep hundreds of thousands of borrowers in debt. We are not backing down or will give an inch when it comes to defending working families, the department said in a statement. It is part of a wave of legal challenges Republicans have leveled at the Biden administration's effort to reduce or eliminate student debt for millions of Americans, because how else can they win? Tank the economy? Blame it on Joe. Weekend staff at the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oregon has extended rules restricting the state's lucrative Dungeness crab fishery in order to protect humpback whales from becoming entangled in ropes attached to crab traps. Humpbacks, which migrate off Oregon's coast, and other whales can get caught in the vertical ropes connected to the heavy traps and drag them around for months, leaving the mammals injured, starved, or so exhausted that they can drown. Oregon's Dungeness crab fishery is one of the backbones of the Pacific Northwest fishing industry, But crabbers fear that over-regulation will harm the industry. Where have we heard that before? The Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission voted late Friday to extend, with no sunset date, measures that were originally supposed to end after this season. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife said in a statement, the measures include limiting the number of crab traps in the water and how deep they can be placed in the months when humpback whales are more likely to swim there. Commissioners also requested that the rules be reviewed after 2 years. Whale entanglement started to increase in 2014 along the West Coast, but remained low and stable in Oregon. Humpback whales, a federally listed species with a growing population off the West Coast, are the whales most frequently entangled. The whales can get caught in the vertical ropes connected to the heavy traps and drag them around for months. The debate in the Pacific Northwest is a microcosm of the broader struggle nationwide to address the urgent problem of whale entanglements without wiping out commercial fishermen. California and the U.S. East Coast have taken similar actions to protect whales. In 2021 through 22, Oregon crabbers landed more than 17 million pounds and delivered a record $91 million in crab due to high market prices. Well, that's where their motivation is. It's only aspirational, though. Okay, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You were listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, it's a Barbie world. Barbie is more than a toy. She's a bona fide icon who's been part of the lexicon for more than 7 decades and is loved nearly as much as she's reviled. There's a lot of complexity wrapped up in that 11-inch doll that can't even stand on her permanently arched feet, and Greta Gerwig's latest offering, Barbie, reflects that complexity. When we first meet our Barbie, played to the hilt by Margot Robbie, she's having a perfect day in Barbie Land, where she's just one of many Barbies, also having perfect days. In fact, every day and everything is perfect in the pink, matriarchal-ruled Barbie Land. However, our heroine has recently been plagued with ideas with which no other Barbie has ever had to deal. These include thoughts of death, and to the absolute horror of all, the appearance of cellulite on Barbie's once perfect legs. Following the advice of Weird Barbie, a scene-stealing Kate McKinnon, Barbie learns she must travel to the real world, aka LA, so hopefully all can be made perfect again in Barbie Land. Tagging along for the ride is Ken, a delightful Ryan Gosling, who learns along with Barbie that the real world truly is different from Barbie Land. Barbie quickly learns that many in the real world view her very existence as problematic, and rather than to build girls up, she can be used as a tool of the patriarchy to crush the self-esteem of girls and even women who grew up playing with Barbies and who still see the dolls as the embodiment of the ideal woman. While Barbie's central theme, that being an actual woman in the real world is really tough, isn't new, the approach the movie takes is totally fresh and fun and seemingly deserving of its movie of the summer status. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schwing. Have you ever looked up to see a hawk soar overhead? Or a small chickadee flit by and wondered, how do they do that? Believe it or not, scientists never really knew either. until now.
I looked at the relationship between form and function in the most basic sense.
Talia Lowy-Mary is a PhD student at the University of Toronto in Canada. She says bird flight has everything to do with the shape and size of a bird's sternum or breastbone. Bird sternums have a projection from the middle called the keel, and this is where the flight muscles are attached.
It's plausible to think that this element is important for flight, but why does it vary so much in shape and size relative to the body? There are all these questions about it that haven't been answered in the past.
So Mary set out to find some answers using a database of CT-scanned sternums from 105 different bird species, like the red-capped lark, Leach's storm petrel, and the southern cassowary. She also included 2 extinct birds, the dodo and the great auk. The scans combine a series of X-rays to create 3-dimensional images.
And so because the sternum is a complex element in 3 dimensions, it's not just a 2D bone, it's got projections out the middle and out the sides. Looking at it in 3 dimensions is the best way to quantify the shape and analyze it in a statistical framework. So more recently, those methods have become more accessible. And I guess because of that, I was able to do it now. And maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it wasn't possible.
Mary and colleagues used the scans to create computerized 3D models.
And so when you do that, you can move it around, you can place points on it in the important spots. And so that's what I was doing. I was putting these dots that are called landmarks. And the landmarks basically quantify in 3D computer space where the important points are on the element.
The findings published in BMC Biology show that sternum size and shape has a direct impact on the way a bird flies.
So an eagle would be soaring and wouldn't be moving its wings as much. It just has its arms stretched out. And it has very intricate structures in its wings and in its shoulder to hold the wings out, but it doesn't have to use as much flapping power.
But compare the majestic eagle with a frantically flapping duck. Birds with a deep sternal keel fly more slowly. Those with long sternums are associated with running birds. Mary also looked at foot-propelled underwater diving birds. These are species like the cormorant, the loon, and the grebe.
They have this streamlined sternum with a lower sternal keel, so everything is kind of compact and flattened. But you actually see something really similar in birds that are wing-propelled divers.
Those wing-propelled divers include small birds you might find on the ocean, puffins, common murres, and penguins. Mary says whether wing or foot-propelled, the sternums of these birds are similar in shape.
All other sorts of factors are possibly, most likely, contributing to the shape of the sternum, not just locomotion. Things like birds that dance to attract a mate, or how big their egg is relative to their body size. There are all sorts of things that could be contributing to this. We've just, scratched the surface, looked at one aspect of variation, but there's so much more.
Mary believes that the shape and structure of the sternum impacts how different species of birds breathe. She also says different methods of flight mean different resource demands for individual species. Diving deep into how birds fly today can tell scientists a lot about how they evolved over millions of years.
So birds evolved from dinosaurs, and we don't know exactly which fossil birds and which dinosaurs were capable of flight, but gaining a better understanding of how birds fly today is the key to completing that picture of how the dinosaurs were moving through the world.
Mary plans to dig into fossil birds next, in part to learn more about the origins of flight.
The thing about fossil birds is that a lot of them are flattened into rock slabs, but there are so many amazing bird fossils, especially from China. And so they will have to be studied a little bit differently because I may not be able to put them in a 3-dimensional context as I did with the modern bird sterna.
For now, though, she says she's looking differently at the small passerine birds that flit by her windows and dominate the tree branches in her backyard in Ontario.
They're mostly continuous flapping birds. They're flapping pretty quickly. They're moving from branch to branch. They're trying to keep away from predators and get some food, whether it's insects or berries. Yeah, it made me think about how, their skeletons are structured and also how their muscles are working much differently than, let's say, a hawk that's soaring above. And so they would require different metabolism and different food sources, and how they use that in their body would be very different.
For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Schwing.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Weather forecasters across the Southwest are having a hard time this summer, coming up with descriptive taglines for each day's ever-rising heat. If 105 degrees is hot, what to call 110 and up? Some have quit trying, simply labeling each day again. Luckily, Joe Biden has issued bold new steps to counter the relentless climate change that's causing this extreme killer heat. For example, workers will get hazard alerts telling them that it's hot. Also, a new website will urge everyone to stay hydrated. His aides say this shows that Joe is treating climate change with, quote, the urgency it deserves. Excuse me while I have a political heat stroke. Urgency? The same day Biden launched his pathetic global warming policy, the Republican Supreme Court rubber-stamped his disastrous push for the massively polluting Mountain Valley Pipeline. This 300-mile environmental scar across 2 states will be like adding 26 more coal-fired power plants to our climate change crisis. Then there's his unconscionable approval this year of Willow, an oil drilling project in the Arctic that will release hundreds of millions of tons of additional greenhouse gas emissions, plus approving and subsidizing dozens of other fossil fuel boondoggles. Worse, Biden has meekly refused to take the genuinely bold step of declaring a climate change emergency, even as he's pushed new laws to remove the people's right to challenge corporate profiteering at the expense of climate sanity. This is Jim Hightower saying, yes, the Republicans are worse, but pointing that out as neither a policy nor good politics. Climate change is not a future problem, it is now. If Biden wonders why his approval rating is a woeful 39%, there it is. People want and need presidential boldness, not a hot weather website.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1890. That was the day that one of the heroines of the U.S. labor movement, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, was born in Concord, New Hampshire. Elizabeth learned her progressive politics at a young age. Her father was a socialist and her mother a feminist. Elizabeth was kicked out of high school for speaking out in favor of socialism. This did not slow her down. She kept speaking and her reputation grew. She became a member of the Industrial Workers of the World. She traveled the country organizing and speaking to workers. From the Minnesota Iron Range to the textile mills of Lawrence, Massachusetts, Elizabeth was on the front lines of the labor struggle. She was arrested for her activity 10 times, but was never sentenced. During World War I, Flynn was arrested and stood trial for speaking out against the war. The experience led her to become one of the founders of the American Civil Liberties Union, an organization dedicated to protecting freedom of speech. In the 1930s, Flynn became a member of the U.S. Communist Party, writing a regular column for the Daily Worker. But despite her personal political ideas, she supported Democratic Party President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1944. During the 1950s, she was caught up in the anti-communist hysteria led by Senator Joe McCarthy. She went to prison for 2 years for allegedly violating the Smith Act, a law against overthrowing the government. She died while on a visit to Russia in 1964. More than 20,000 people attended her funeral there. A monument to Flynn stands at the Forest Home Cemetery just outside of Chicago, where she is buried alongside the graves of Eugene Dennis, Big Bill Haywood, and the Haymarket Martyrs. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 60 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low 90s, partly cloudy with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, a few clouds overnight, lows in the low 60s, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then sunshine along with some cloudy intervals tomorrow with highs in the mid-90s, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen remains the dominant pollen, dominating us here in our little town of Rogue River, and it is rated as moderate. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 35 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so you know to take care. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.11 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 81%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that makes up the Weather Underground. London is 71 degrees and fair. Paris is 71 and sunny. Rome is 83 degrees and fair. Kabul is 72 and clear. Kyiv is 71 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 85 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 83 and mostly cloudy. Melbourne, Australia is 42 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 61 and sunny. Chicago, Illinois is 70 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 75 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. The far-right Alternative for Germany party declared the European Union a failed project in its current form as it adopted its program for next June's European Parliament election at its party convention in the eastern city of Magdeburg yesterday, Sunday. The text states that the EU has completely failed in all important areas, including its migration and climate policy, and it rejects the euro as a currency. However, The party stopped short of demanding Germany's exit from the EU. Instead, the Alternative for Germany party is calling for the EU to be refounded as a federation of European nations. According to the election program, the main tasks of the new federation should be the protection of external borders against migration, strategic autonomy and security policy, and the preservation of different identities in Europe, separate but equal. Recent polls put support for the AfD at 19 to 22%, behind only the main conservative opposition bloc. AfD candidates recently won elections in eastern Germany to lead a county administration for the first time since the 1930s, and now holds the mayor position in a town with a population of 56,000.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Weekend staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A 19-year-old Israeli tourist said he was attacked by 3 men in Berlin, and police said yesterday, Sunday, they were investigating a possible anti-Semitic motive. Berlin police said their state protection office, which is responsible for investigating politically motivated crimes, was looking into the case after the tourist suffered minor injuries to one of his arms and his face on Saturday night. The Israeli tourist told police he was walking on the street in the city's Kreuzberg district, together with an 18-year-old woman while speaking on his phone in Hebrew. A car pulled next to them, and 3 men got out, started talking to the Israeli man in German, which he explained to police he did not understand as he does not speak German. After that, the Israeli man told police that one of the men suddenly began to beat him, knocking him to the ground. The 3 attackers then continued to beat and kick him. The Israeli man told police. Then the attackers got back into their car and drove off. The young woman was unharmed. The Israeli man then checked himself into a hospital where the hospital alerted the police. Anti-Semitic incidents are common in Germany. In its recent annual report, the Department of Research and Information on Anti-Semitism said it had documented 2,480 incidents in the country just last year, just under 7 incidents per day on average. They include violent crimes, such as the shooting at a former rabbi's house next to an old synagogue in the western city of Essen last November, but they also include everyday situations at workplaces, homes, on public transportation, and at supermarkets. Benjamin Heitz, the head of the organization, told reporters in June. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert dentelles et d'étier, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.